What is a hazard and what risk does it pose on your well-being? I'm going to tell you all about it inside.
RevelatorAlf.
Hello, welcome to RevelatorAlf, for Biker's Life Less Ordinary. So in this video I'm talking about hazard awareness and perception and how can it affect your well-being. People every day are having accidents all over the world, of course, whether on motorcycles, cars, climbing up ladders, falling over in the street, whatever it is. The question is, why are people having accidents, or why are certain people having accidents, getting themselves into bother and others people not? Well, a lot of it comes down to what we call hazard perception and hazard recognition and perception. What if there is a hazard there? Do people even recognize the scenario? Do they understand there is a hazard there in the first place? Then it's about how they deal with that perception of a hazard. Do they perceive it to be a threat or imminent threat, a threat to somebody else? Do they perceive that their own abilities will be able to deal with that threat or that hazard? And what is the final outcome? Do they actually do anything about it? So let's go right back to the very start. I've been involved in emergency services for many years and I've dealt with countless motorcycle accidents and car accidents. And the fundamental reason why people are having accidents is down to this process, this hazard recognition and hazard perception. When I ran motorcycle safety campaigns in the past, I focused heavily on this point. It's about riders or drivers or whatever it is, whether you're walking down the street, it's about recognizing a situation where a hazard might be relevant. Now, let's say, for example, you're riding your motorcycle down a road and you're coming up to, there are very high hedges either side, for example. There's a bend in the road and the road is obscured up ahead. The question is, what kind of hazard does that potentially pose? Well, there could be another vehicle coming very close to the centre line around the bend, or even cutting the bend and coming over. You might misjudge the bend yourself. You might assume that it's a gentle bend, but actually might be a very tight bend. There might be debris on the road, there might be water on the road that may cause you to lose traction. Whatever it is, there are countless hazards associated with a particular scenario. But it's whether you recognize they're there in the first place and what priority you'll give them as well. So this is something we can practice on a daily basis and then incorporate our own skills, our own levels, and improve our levels as well. It's about recognizing the hazards, recognizing each scenario and what potential hazards can be there. Then as we're in that moment, in that scenario, we can see how the hazards are developing and then presenting themselves to us and how we can then react to them. So I'll give you a classic example. You're riding your motorcycle along a straight stretch of road and there is a junction up ahead, a side turning. So as we're approaching that junction, you can either carry on at the same speed, you can change your position on the road so as you're passing the junction, you're further away from the junction, the mouth of the junction. You could do a combination of the two, slow down and move away from the junction. But also you could really look at the junction itself, look at oncoming traffic. Is it an open junction where you could see vehicles coming out or approaching that junction from the side? So on and so forth. So there are lots of ways that you can approach that. If you approach it with caution, or if you approach it with the mindset that there is definitely a hazard there, there might be something that could affect the way I drive or the way I ride, then you're going to be in a much better position to be primed. You'll be priming yourself to deal with that hazard. Whether to cover the brakes even before you get to the junction, whether you've slowed down, whether you're prepared to avoid the hazard in the first place. So there are lots of ways of being able to deal with a hazard. But the first thing you've got to do is recognize the potential of a hazard. That's the key point. Recognize the potential, recognize the scenarios where there might be hazards, and then you can incorporate your countermeasures to deal with that hazard. Let's say you're going to climb up a ladder, for example. Well, then how steep are you putting it? Is it really windy that day? What's the ground like? Is it soft? Is it hard but very slippery? Do you need an extra person? Do you need to tie the ladder down to brace it into position? All these kinds of things that you can think about just in the simple act of putting up a ladder against a wall that you need to climb up against. You're walking down the street. Is it icy? Is it wet? Are there paving slabs that are sticking up out of the ground? Are there lots of other people, lots of cars that are turning across the path? That kind of thing. Anything that could potentially affect your well-being. What about environmental factors? Let's say the weather. Is it really windy? Are there lots of trees around? If there are lots of trees around, whether you're driving, whether you're riding, whether you're walking, so on and so forth, is there potential for branches and debris to fall down over the top of you or in front of you? This is what we mean about hazard perception. Recognizing scenarios where there might be a hazard, then recognizing the hazards as they develop, then you are what you perceive as that hazard, and you're rating that hazard. Is it a threat to you? Can you deal with it? What level of skill do you have? What countermeasures do you have to employ? So on and so forth. If you adopt this kind of policy, then you're a lot less likely to be affected by any kind of hazard. Whether you're on a motorcycle, in a car, walking, riding your bicycle, doing a leisure activity. There is a saying that no accident is an accident. There's always a cause, there's always a reason why something happens. And there's always a reason why people get into accidents. And the overwhelming majority of reasons is that the people involved did not recognize that there was a hazard, and that hazard that was developing would affect them. Now, of course, there are things that are beyond your control. An act of God, let's say, an earthquake, a natural disaster, whatever it is, something that happens in front of you that you just can't deal with. That happens spontaneously. But those are, in the grand scheme of all accidents, that's a very small percentage of accidents. So what we're dealing with is 99.9% of all accidents, all injuries in the world, let's say, and how can you deal with it best? Well, I hope you found this useful. If you adopt this policy, you'll be a lot better at dealing with hazards, or recognizing them, dealing with hazards, and continuing on in a safer manner. Right, catch you on the next video, whenever that is. Cheers now.
RevelatorAlf.